Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Interesting topic, let's do it. People who have survived a murder attempt by dumb luck. What happened? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
Thank God for my nosy neighbors. I always used to hate how nosy they were until this happened. When I was about 10, I was riding my bike outside. My parents always let me ride my bike outside during the summer, but only up and down the street we were on. One day, a man in a van was parked across the street. He called to me, asking me if I had seen his dog and could help him find it. Me, being a dumb child, offered to help him find it, and I started walking towards his van. My neighbor, an older white lady, came bolting out of her house, hooting and yelling, telling the guy to back off. The dude got back in his car in a hurry and took off, and it wasn't until many years later that I realized how bad that situation could have been. When I was about 10, my grandfather was dying from complications from his heart issues and mental deterioration. I didn't know him very well, as the last time we had been in contact with him was when I was a baby. My father never liked him, and didn't bother coming with me and my mother to visit him in the hospital. When we got there, he was resting peacefully, and my mother went forward and whispered some words to him. I imagine his current state of health. I hang back a little bit because of this creepy old guy, whom I didn't recall seeing in my whole life, really freaked me out. Regardless of my anxiety, my mom said I should approach Grandpa and share some nice words with him. I understood from how sad my mother was that I shouldn't argue too much, so I approached his hospital bed to speak to him. He didn't seem conscious at all, so I just did what my mother did, leaning forward and whispering some nice things to him. Things took a turn when, mid-sentence, his eyes flared and he stared at me, making me stop what I was saying. My heart dropped into my ass when he looked at me because there was pure hatred in his eyes. As soon as we made eye contact, he bolted upright from his bed and wrapped his hands around my neck and started throttling me as hard as he could. I barely even remember what happened, but my mom was screaming for a nurse, and Grandpa kept yelling at me while shaking my neck violently. "Faking betrayal! You betray me!" And then he died. Almost as fast as it began, it was over. His grip loosened and he flatlined. My mother was inconsolable, and I was extremely confused and crying out of sheer trauma at the situation. Later, after we managed to calm down, a nurse explained to my mother that his severe dementia had left him barely coherent, and it was likely he thought I was someone else. I didn't learn this until several years later, but my mother suspected my grandfather saw my father in me. My father was an alcoholic womanizer and fairly abusive in my early childhood, and my grandfather resented him for it. I guess I look a little too much like my dad. My dad has a client who owns a number of fast food restaurants. One day we were working at one of his stores, remodeling, and talking about robberies. The client told us that when he was just getting into the fast food business, he lived in Colorado. He was an assistant manager at a chain that required him to wear a tie. A drug addict came into the restaurant to rob them and grabbed him from behind, putting a knife to his throat. He opened the register, and the guy attempted to slit his throat anyway, except the knife was dull and couldn't cut through the material of the tie. The client began to fight back and escaped with minor injuries. Addict went to prison, and apparently he has the tie in a frame at home. I was a bouncer at a club in LA for a minute in the 90s. I stopped some dudes clearly affiliated with a gang at the door after they refused security checks. After a few minutes of their threats and Manson lamps, they left, spewing all sorts of warnings. A little later, it starts to wind down, and because it's a little slow and we're overstaffed, I start to drink. I get a bit drunk, not wasted, but sleepy buzzed, so I tell my buddy I'm going to lay down in the back of his car for a while. A few minutes after lying down, I realize I have to piss. I get out and stumble a few into a spot between a guard gate for a parking lot and a building for a little privacy. There's a few dozen people milling around in front of the club. I'm about 25 feet away from the club's entrance and just off an alleyway. While I'm relieving myself, a dude runs right past in front of me, around the guard booth to my rear, and unloads a 9mm, recovered rounds from the back seat, trunk, roof, and bumper into the back seat of the car I just crawled out of. Bam, 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 unloading into the car. He then turns, runs right back past me and down the alley into the night. I don't think he saw me at all. Nothing really came of it, except my partner was convinced I was a marked man and refused to be near me for a year or so. I have a friend who had a party at his parents' house when he was in high school that a ton of random people went to. He got super drunk during the party and went upstairs to go to sleep, knowing that his friends would watch the party for him. My friend woke up from his nap to find a guy from his school sitting on top of him, stabbing him to death. He was stabbed 7 times before it stopped, and he lay there on the bed dying. The only reason he's still alive is because his best friend came upstairs to ask him if it was alright if he made a frozen pizza and found him. The assailant was put in jail and recently released, and it scares me to know that a guy who wanted to know what it would feel like to kill someone, said during the trial, is still out there free. Our neighbors when I was growing up had 3 kids the same age as myself and my siblings. We were all friends and got along well for the most part. Their eldest child, I'll call him Peter, has Asperger's syndrome and was known to have outbursts that would sometimes be violent. One day when I was 5 or 6, our mother decided to take all 6 of us to a nearby wading pool because it was hot out. Well, due to that it was pretty busy, and there were a lot of other kids. There were 2 lifeguards there, but they were generally too busy chatting with each other to be doing their jobs, as Mother later tells me. I was off with my neighbor's daughter, who was my age, and Peter. I don't remember why, but he suddenly flew into a fit and decided that I was at fault for something. He, being about 8 and a lot bigger than me, grabs my head and holds it under the water. I remember that. I remember not being able to breathe. I remember clearly thinking that I needed air or I was going to die. I remember fighting, but not being strong enough to get him off of me. Then I remember my mom's face. She had a clear look of both terror and fury. I remember looking over and seeing Peter sitting with his arms around his knees, rocking back and forth as his mother tried to calm him down. Then I remember my mom absolutely losing it on the lifeguards, who had missed everything and were clueless as to why this tiny woman was screaming at them that her daughter had almost drowned on their watch. To this day I have a fear of swimming and absolutely do not having water on my face, even when I'm showering. I was abducted at a gas station during undergrad. The locks on my car were broken, and as soon as I got back in, a strange man came in and forced me to drive him to an ATM. I'm paralyzed with fear, so any sense or reason I had went out the window. He claimed he worked at Wendy's, and for my generosity he would give me all the Wendy's I ever wanted. On the way to the ATM, he showed me pictures of his daughters on his clearly stolen cell phone. Then a Whitney Houston song came on the radio, and he starts bawling his eyes out and screaming, "Why do all the good people have to die? Only bad things should happen to bad people." I go to the ATM, take out cash, and give it to him thinking it's over. He then makes me get back in the car and drive him somewhere else. We pass by some train tracks, and I'm thinking, this is it. This is where I'll be murdered. He asks me what I'm studying at school, and I tell him biochemistry. I believe in jet propulsion and all that shit. We're not alone. Aliens are among us. He then makes me pull over at a gas station and tells me, "Drive away, sweetheart." I called the cops, had to do a lineup, and apparently this dude had done this to a ton of other women, and some were less unscathed than I was.
That's a frightening situation. I'm glad everything worked out all right, but... people.
Mine's not extreme by any chance, but a couple of years ago, my brother and I went to walk the dog at like 11 p.m. We left through the side gate, live on a corner, and right as we exited, I saw this weird-looking dude at the corner of the footpath walking weirdly toward us. I got bad vibes and told my brother to get the dog and get back inside. This dude is walking kinda sideways and hiding something in his hand behind his back. As I'm getting my brother through the gate, the dude says something like, "Oi mate, can I come in? I need a blanket, I'm freezing." I just ignored him and went inside and locked the door. We then get a call from the people who live 2 doors up. The same dude knocked on their door and their 10-year-old son opened it to see the dude holding a hecking hatchet. Anyway, I'm glad I went with my gut on that one. My supposed best friend decided that my wife and I were too perfect, therefore it must all be an act and I was obviously abusing her. He was at our house after I made an awesome dinner and we're having fun drinking and singing karaoke. I went to the kitchen to put some glasses away, came back and leaned on the couch with him slightly behind me to the left of me. Then I heard a thunk and felt an amazing amount of pain on the top of my head. He had picked up the whiskey bottle on the table and smashed it into my skull. I was very confused as to what was happening. Then the blood started pouring. I didn't want to get blood everywhere, so I went to the kitchen. Dude is pacing back and forth, saying weird shit. I thought about my gun, which was close by, but I wasn't thinking quite straight. He left. I had a huge concussion, and still suffer side effects from it. My number 2 goal in life is to live longer than that asshat, just so I can shit on his grave. I wasn't a murder attempt, maybe it was, but a stabbing attempt, I guess. It happened when I was around 12 to 13 years old. I was taking a lifeguarding course at a local pool with a friend of mine, which had about 16 people in the class. The age ranges in the class can vary, and we probably had a mix of people between 12 and 18, but most were somewhere in the middle. There was this one kid, probably 16 or 17, that really stood out to me and my friend as the typical school shooter type. He has a very solemn look on his face at all times, is socially awkward, and is extremely quiet. We both got really strong serial killer vibes from him. It's just one of those instincts you feel that tells you something isn't right. We made a few jokes between ourselves about it, as we both noticed it almost immediately, and were fairly uncomfortable being around him. This lasted for probably the first 2 hours of the 4-hour class. At that point, we were asked to switch from pool instruction into a classroom, and we had about 20 minutes to change and get into the classroom. As we're all changing, this guy kept looking over at me and my friend. We tried not to make eye contact with him and just ignore it, but we were getting extremely uncomfortable with how intensely the guy was staring. We were the only 3 in the changing room, and were intent on leaving as fast as possible. Eventually, my friend makes eye contact with the guy, who screams something along the lines of, "Stop looking at me," pulling a switchblade out of his swim bag and lunging at my friend. I stood there somewhat frozen as this was happening, and didn't really know what to do, whether to try and help or run. My friend ended up blocking the initial lunge with the locked door, and he sprinted toward the front exit of the change room with this enraged, knife-wielding teenager chasing him. When my friend had made it out of the change room, the maniac turned around and started chasing me down. With pool deck floors, they're extremely slippery and almost impossible to run on, but 12-year-old me wasn't exactly worried about that at this point. I had to run from the change room locker area, through the bathrooms, through a shower room, and then onto the pool deck, the only other exit. All I remember is him catching up to me, and he must have been within reach at some point on this 100-meter run, but I remember turning around once, and I made it on the pool deck, and the guy was gone. I was half-dressed, and basically still sprinting toward the lifeguard office. Once there, I found our instructor and told him what happened. He didn't believe me. He said I was lying, and was just picking on the kid, nothing happened, etc. So I told him to try and find my friend with me. I was panicky and hyperventilating, but apparently not believable. My friend was still out in the lobby now, with a ton of concerned parents around, trying to figure out what was going on. It turns out that when he blocked the knife with the locked door, the knife got to his forearm, and he was bleeding pretty badly. Not arterial, but probably a 6-inch gash on the hairy part of your arm. Immediately, my instructor ushered us away and called the police. The building went into lockdown, etc. To this day, I have no idea what happened to that kid. He never came back to the class, and the police didn't find him that night. I'm assuming he got arrested, but I never heard about it. It was probably the closest I ever came to getting killed, and I'm not exactly sure why or how he didn't stab me, or if he slipped and fell before making it to me. He was considerably larger than me and definitely faster. All I know now is that I should trust my instincts more with people. They might turn out to be true. I was riding a train across Eastern Europe. I was running low on money, and even though I had been warned that a woman should not travel alone in second-class seating, I did not spring for first class. I was sitting alone in one of the compartments that seat 6. This was also a mistake, and a very stupid one to sit alone. Eventually the train stopped, and a man got on. He was very drunk. He came into my compartment, and I guess he thought I looked like his ex-wife. He attacked me. If it were not for the fact that this particular station was the border between 2 countries, I would be dead. Instead, border patrols from both countries were on the train, and while I was unable to scream, the door was open, and at least half a dozen uniformed men jumped him and saved me. I was in the hospital for a little while, but I recovered. At one point during the trial, one of the cops asked me if I wanted him and his buddies to hold the guy while I hit him. I thought he was joking, so I said, "No, go ahead and do it." I was also joking, but it turns out they took it seriously and were about to. I did put a stop to that at least, but they were so offended that someone from their country would attack a young female American tourist. They were furious with him. So many people there depend on tourism. This all happened many years ago. I was a lead man at a factory. A girl starts working there, and I take an interest. After a few months, I find out she is in a terrible drug-fueled abusive relationship. Every night I tell her to call me. I'll come get her. Finally, after months, she calls me. I come get her and take her to my house. The guy she was in a relationship with didn't take it too kindly to me to taking her away. He spends the next 2 years harassing and threatening us. A few months after she and I got married, we went out for a few drinks. Her ex just happened to be at the bar we went to. He apologized to us for the threats and harassment. We were sitting outside talking with a few other people. Next thing I know, I'm on my back on the ground with someone choking me. I try all I can to get them off of me, but being blindsided and them being on top of me, it wasn't easy. As I struggle to get free, everything goes black, and then I see the light at the end of the tunnel. In that moment, I was certain this was the end for me. I somehow managed to get a better hold of this person's head, and I yanked them off me. We run to the car and get away. A week or so later, my wife had been talking to everyone she thought that might have known what happened. It turns out that her ex paid 2 people $50 to kill me that night. I was doing volunteer work in Central America, working in a really bad area of the capital city. It was a slum built on top of the city's garbage dump. The whole place reeked of trash, and there were large metal cylinders coming up out of the ground throughout the area to vent the gas from decomposing garbage underground. As a fellow volunteer and I walked down a dirt path, 2 men approached us. I'd never seen them before. They were acting strangely, but I just thought they were drunk or high. A lot of people in the area drank rubbing alcohol to get drunk, since it was cheaper than beer or liquor. Over time, drinking the rubbing alcohol would really mess with their brains. As the men got closer, they began acting really friendly, too friendly. One of them came close to me, trying to put his arm around my shoulder. At first, it seemed like the behavior of a guy who gets happy and friendly when he's drunk. However, an alarm went off in my head, and I gently but firmly pushed him away. I tried to make it seem lighthearted and playful, like, "Hey man, how's it going?" Affectionate shove. I didn't want to make a scene, since I was a gringo. I didn't want to seem like an ugly American. This went on over and over down the whole path. He'd get close, I'd shove him off, and he'd come close again. Finally, my friend and I came to a fork in the path, and we went one way while they went another. After we got to the house of some people we knew, we told them about the 2 guys. I was so focused on protecting myself that I didn't even notice much of what was happening with the other guy. They said, "Oh, everyone around here knows him. That's his routine. He comes up to people, pretends to be friendly, puts his arm around them, then pulls out his knife and stabs them in the stomach." I was that close to getting stabbed to death.